Okay, so we've just heard about psoriatic arthritis. I'd like to introduce you to Vaughan Davis, who has suffered from PsA for 33 of her 52 years. She wanted me to mention her age and the length of time she suffered from it, because it is something that just goes on. And I think she said that the pictures of the hands there probably were of her hands. So Vaughan is a journalist with CBC National, and I'm pleased to introduce you to her. Thank you. Vaughan.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm just kind of curious, how many people here have psoriatic arthritis? And how many people have AS? Okay, yeah, I just wanted to know. Okay, great. So it's really fun to address patients. I've never done this before, and I've never seen so many people who look a lot like me. Anyway, so the title of my speech really is Getting Well. And so I've often asked myself, like a lot of you, what would I do if I won $1 million? I mean, this is a common parlor game that people play with their friends, and I've played it, like many of you probably have, speculating about how a wild financial windfall might transform your life. But I have to say, secretly, I've never played that game with very much enthusiasm, because the question really didn't seem that interesting to me. The really interesting question to me, or what I secretly dreamed of, what I would ask myself at my darkest moments, often alone, was, what would I do if I ever got well? So that's what I want to talk about today, getting well, winning that medical lottery. The fact is that the advent of the new anti-TNF biologic drugs has made sustained and very dramatic remissions possible for a lot of patients with arthritis. Many of us who've suffered for decades with severe crippling disease are able to achieve that medical lottery. We've lived for decades boxed in by stiffness, by progressive joint damage, by chronic fatigue, and then we find ourselves suddenly sprung from the pain prison. And there's no arthritis parole officers to meet with on the way out, I can tell you that. And, you know, we treat prisoners. We give them some sort of advice on their way out, and they get halfway houses. We just go straight out on the street with normal, healthy people, and I have to tell you that for me, it's been a really bizarre experience, but very exciting in ways that I had never, ever imagined. My story will be familiar, I think, to a lot of you. At the age of 19, I was just a normal university student. I shared an apartment with a woman who came up to about my shoulder at the bottom of a hill. And every day we would walk up to class together in the winter. And I started to notice about halfway through my second year in school that I was having trouble keeping up with this little slip of a roommate in the morning. It just seemed like an effort to keep up with her. And then I found I was having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning and feeling stiff and tired, and I didn't really think too much of it. My fingers and toes would occasionally swell up. I thought, did I hurt myself at a party last night and not even know what I'd done? And then finally, one of my knees started troubling me and was waking me up with excruciating pain in the middle of the night. And I thought, well, maybe I heard it running. So I went to a doctor, and the doctor said, this looks like arthritis to me. And I said, what? You've got to be kidding. So I went to a rheumatologist. Now, I'd always had, since the age of 8, a very mild case of psoriasis, which was, you know, fairly well controlled. And that was genetic. It ran in my family. But nobody in my family had had arthritis. I went to the doctor, and he said, you have psoriatic arthritis. And I was like, what? What is psoriatic arthritis? He sort of explained, wrote me a prescription for anti-inflammatory drugs, and sent me out on the street. And I was left not realizing just how severe this disease could be. And to give the doctors credit, at the time in 1979, they didn't know how severe it could be either. I was left as a young adult not really being very, very emotionally, psychologically isolated from other people my age, because I looked perfectly normal. Yet I was exhausted all the time. I would be twitching in my seat, trying to find a comfortable place to sit. I'd be limping. Yet people couldn't understand. And it was a really hard thing to deal with. As I got older, I got married, I got a job, and the disease just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I started to experience joint damage, first in my neck. Very, very quickly, the cervical vertebrae fused, a couple of them, and I can't turn it very well. Then my shoulders started hurting very badly, and I complained of that, and it wasn't for about a year that I even got an x-ray. And then at which point the doctor came back and said, "You don't have any cartilage left in your shoulders." See, what wasn't known at the time, again, was just how fast this disease could destroy your joints. I went through life, tried to keep up a normal life, had 3 children. Every time I had a baby, I got pregnant, I went into a remission, which was great. But afterwards, the arthritis would come back with a vengeance. And then in the middle of raising young infants, I'd be struck by a sudden and severe attack, usually. At one point, it was my hands while I was trying to hold my second baby. I couldn't even hold the baby. My hands got so damaged, I could barely move them. By the time I was, it's interesting to talk about really the emotional and social impact of that. It was, again, very, very isolating. As I said, you look normal, and people can't relate to the fact that you're tired and in pain. And also, it's a mental thing. When you go through every day having to measure every choice you make to make a sort of an individual cost-benefit analysis about every petty thing. Am I going to get up off the sofa and get that magazine I want across the room? And you have to measure it against your own personal pain ruler. Is it worth it? Your life, your whole outlook on life becomes very, very narrow. And I lived with that. Physically, it was very, very hard to have friends. I couldn't get out in the evening. Most of my friends were my husband's friends because I had moved to Canada to marry him and never really had time to go out and meet people. And I thought of myself as kind of a quiet, antisocial person, really, because I was sleeping 9 to 10 hours a night. All I could do was work, come home, go back to work, come home, sleep. But it was isolating in other ways, too. I found myself constantly fighting the expectation that I should be fighting this disease. I think the consumer health movement is great, but I think in a lot of ways it puts a lot of burden on patients that you have to somehow be the master of your own disease, and you have to fight it, and you have to conquer it, and everything. But sometimes you just have to learn to live with it, and that is, in fact, part of conquering it, is accepting what you can't do, but taking advantage of what you can do. And that's really what got me through all those decades, which was, instead of dwelling on the fact that I couldn't ski anymore, I couldn't play tennis, I couldn't go out in the evening, there were many things that I could do that were really, really cool. I learned how to video edit on a computer. I did a lot of quiet activities. When I was home on one of my maternity leaves, I found it very difficult to be with the infant all day, just physically. So I got a babysitter for part of the time, and I went back to school. I went back to U of T and studied math, completely unrelated to my career, but just something I just thought would be fun to challenge myself on. So I explored sort of more the intellectual life because I had time. The reality is, and what I found through this disease, is that there's only 24 hours in the day, and that we as humans, there's so much we can do with our lives. We can, even healthy people, we can't exploit all the possibilities in our life. And that no matter how bad our disability is, there's always something we can do that's really great, that even as disabled as you aren't ever going to have enough time to get as good at it or really explore it as much as you might really want to. And that was very, very encouraging. But by the age of 40, I had really physically hit rock bottom. The disease had damaged my feet, my hands, my elbows, wrists, my back, and I was having such severe fatigue and pain that I could barely walk. I was walking with a cane, at one point with crutches. I couldn't take the subway to work. I had to drive to work every day, which was very expensive. And like, even just getting off the sofa was a big deal, because every time I got off the sofa, I'd have to kind of push myself up and work all the pain and stiffness out of myself, even just to go to the bathroom. And it was really, really hard. And it got so bad that they were looking at fusing one of my feet just to get rid of the pain in the foot so that I could walk on it. And it was a really, really difficult decision. I had two surgeons both make the recommendation that I do it, and I didn't. I decided not to. So then I remember one particular conversation with my doctor, and just almost in tears saying, will I ever be able to do something normal? Like, I'd just like to take my kids to Wonderland. I'd like to be able to go to an amusement park with my kids, but I have no energy, I can't walk, but that's the person I am inside. I want to do stuff like that. And she looked at me, and she didn't outright say no, but I could see the answer on her face. Anyway, 2 years later, Enbrel was approved in Canada, and thanks to a really generous corporate health plan, I was able to get on the drug 2 weeks later. And what ensued then was a rapid disappearance of all my symptoms. I went from not being able to walk to being able to spring out of bed, sleep like a normal person, have tons of energy, and no pain within 5 weeks. And then after 20 years, what do you do with that? It's crazy. So that was 42, I'm 52 now. I'll say that the journey from being well to sick was nothing compared to the journey from being sick to well. It was a long time adjusting, and in many ways I'm still adjusting, because every day, there's not a day that goes by that there isn't some stupid thing that most people would take completely for granted. Being able to wash a kitchen floor, pick up a paper clip, go up to the corner store to buy a lemon because I'm missing an ingredient for something I want to make, and just say, oh, I'll go buy it. That I don't appreciate and say, wow, isn't that great I can do that? And I haven't adjusted. It's been 10 years, and I have that gift every day. So the first thing that I did after I got well was take my kids to Wonderland. And it was my middle son's birthday, and I took he and 2 friends, and we closed the place. I actually wanted to stay longer than those kids. We spent 11 hours at that park, and I went on every water slide and every possible ride, and the kids were trying to drag me home. I had so much fun, and that was just a great day I'll never forget. The other thing I did that first summer was paint my front porch. I come from a long tradition of Yankee thrift. I come from New England, and you never do anything, you never pay anyone to do something that you can do yourself. It had been frustrating for me for years to constantly be hiring people to do things that I felt I should be able to do. So I got up on a ladder and painted that front porch. And I would start early in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't stop till 8 o'clock at night, painting that porch. And I think one of the things that I found is that one of the gifts from the arthritis has been that we learn to endure. We learn to be patient, we learn to put up with things, and we learn to just work our way through it. So we actually learn this tremendous endurance, and that's what I've discovered that I have within me since I've become well. So the incredible appreciation for small things, I've gone over that. Even getting out of bed today to make this speech. I was out till midnight last night, and I had to do 2 jobs last week. I mean, normally in my old life, I would have been in bed all day on Saturday. I mean, today it was just no problem for me to get up and do this. I was looking forward to it. The other thing that I found that was really curious was that I developed this empathy for other people, that there's a difference between sympathy and empathy, truly being able to understand someone else's experience. People that other people might not really look twice at, like really old people, people who are morbidly obese. There was one day I went to the library in the winter to drop off a book, and there was a woman with an old lady who had gotten out in a snowstorm to bring back her library books. And she clearly had really bad arthritis, and I overheard her telling the librarian, could you phone me a taxi? And I immediately said, oh, I can give you a ride home. And the woman looked shocked, and the librarian said, oh no, I know her, she's safe, she can give you a ride home, no problem. But I knew not to patronize this woman. I knew not to, she said, oh, thank you very much, and don't worry, you don't have to walk me to my door. And the streets were covered with ice, and it was crazy. But I had respect for this woman, that she had the bravery to get herself out on a snowy day and do something normal. And it was incredibly hard for her. But not to patronize her, and to know that I shouldn't get out of that car and walk her to the car door. That was really, really, really neat thing, to be able to connect with a person like that. But really what I've learned is to continue to make the best of what I can do, because I was left still with the joint damage, severe joint damage. And when I first got well, I tried to get back into my sports. So I used to play tennis. Well, I tried that, but I can't do overhand. My arms are really limited. Skiing. I had developed an associated osteopenia, and I was afraid to fall as a result, because it was so easy to get bone fractures. So it wasn't fun to ski, because I was afraid of falling. It was just boring. Running, I couldn't run. My feet were damaged. Swimming, I couldn't do the crawl. That was boring. Yoga classes, in exercise and frustration. I can't keep up with anyone. I look at people, I can't do half the poses. It's not fun. So why would I want to go to an exercise class? It's beating my head against the wall. But music, I started trying to play the piano again. I'd always been a musician, a pretty accomplished pianist. I started trying to play the piano again. Got back up to about a grade 3 level, but couldn't really go any further because of my hands. I tried playing the clarinet. Got up to a certain level. Again, the hands limited me. And finally I said, you know what? Why don't you just learn to sing? You don't need your hands for that. So I took I'd never been much of a singer or been that attracted to singing, but I took a class and then thought, well, why don't I join a choir? So I joined this crazy little rock and roll choir, and it only had 20 people in it. And I wasn't that great a singer, but I found I was a fantastic organizer. And I've grown the choir from 20 people to 150. And we now have a waiting list of 50 people. And I've made all sorts of friends that way, and I've created a community. People have even met and gotten married in this choir. So all of a sudden I discovered I could have a social life and that I could be a leader. I never knew that. And that all came out of taking advantage of what I can do, not dwelling on what I can't do. But sports were always important to me. So one thing I started doing was riding my bicycle to work. That was something I could do, and it was fun. And part of that came out of the fact that my feet, I can't really walk on pavement for a long time. It just hurts. My feet are too damaged, so actually biking around the city is a lot easier for me than walking. About 2 years ago, my husband persuaded me to get off the sofa because I still hadn't found a sport that I liked or that I felt good at, and to a spin class. And I got halfway through that spin class and I had to stop, lie down and get a bucket because I thought I was going to throw up. But I persisted. I went back, and a few months later, I did a charity ride. I did a 70-kilometer ride on the Don Valley Parkway, and my friends and family were so keen. I raised thousands of dollars, and I got really enthused and bought a road bike. And from the road bike, because the only joints that weren't damaged in my body are my hips and knees. So this, all of a sudden, I discovered was something I was good at. And then also I had this tremendous level of patience and endurance from years of training from being arthritic. And I found I kept going further and further and further on this bike. And by the end of the summer, I was riding 100 miles at a stretch. And by the following winter, I went down to Puerto Rico and did a 600-kilometer ride over 3 days around Puerto Rico with 500 people, many of them really hot young Puerto Rican triathletes, which was kind of fun. And then I thought, well, I rode 240 kilometers in a day. What would 300 be like? So I tried that in April. I joined a long-distance cycling club, and I did 300 kilometers last April. And then thought, well, what about 400? And then I kept going further and further, and I became an ultramarathon cyclist and ended up in 1 year doing the famed Paris-Brest-Paris, which is a ultra-marathon. It's the oldest running cycling race in history, where you go from Paris to the Atlantic coast and back in 90 hours, 1,200 kilometers. And that was just an incredible experience. Again, endurance. So I'm still doing that. I won a scholarship, and I got sent to a training camp for women to get better at endurance cycling, and I'm at this point training to do a qualifier for the Race Across America. And I don't think I'll ever do that race, but it's fun to dream, and I really wish that, I mean, in some ways, I would never wish arthritis on anyone, but this gift of knowing to take advantage of the things you can do is a wonderful gift, and I'm not sure I ever would have known that if I hadn't had this experience with arthritis. So that's my journey to getting well, and I really thank you all for having me. Thanks a lot.